Hello everyone, Carol Sakey here, Wake Up New Zealand. Just a little bit about myself. For years I've worked, well actually for decades, I worked around grief intervention for a voluntary agency, for several voluntary agencies actually, but mostly around areas of victimology. So supporting victims of crime was the main one that I worked in. So, I think about those times and how privileged I was that people actually gave me entry into their personal lives. I saw people for how they were, not their ethnicity or their culture or their colour or whether they were rich or poor, but I saw people who had bleeding hearts and souls who had been affected by crime. I remember going to visit a little girl whose house had been robbed, and she was so scared. She had thought of these people who had gone into a house as monsters, and she would put her teddy bears and dolls up against her bedroom door at night to barricade herself in. I visited an elderly man who was in hospital who'd been driving along West Coast Road, and he had a car behind him with young hooligans in it, and they kept on flashing their lights at him. And so when he got to the lights, one of the hooligans got out of the door, tapped on his driver's side window. He wound it down, and what this ratbag did was actually violently punch this man in the face so badly he was hospitalised. When I got to see him, he said to me that it was worse than being in the war. He had been in the war, he had seen friends die. He said he'd had a terrible time, but this time, he said he could always fight back, but this time he couldn't. He was elderly, he was helpless, it was a hopeless situation, he was in tears. And these are the sort of people I actually went to see. An elderly man who had gone to his house because he had been robbed while he was asleep. And he said, I visited him several times and spoke about how his life had been violated, that he didn't trust anyone, he put extra locks on the doors, found it hard to sleep at night. After several visits, opened up to me that he had been sexually abused as a child, and he'd held on to that for 50 years, never being able to talk to anyone about that. So, yeah, many different stories. And if I didn't say there were rewards, there were rewards, because what you got was when people found it in themselves to have that strength, to become empowered from their disempowerment, and had taken themselves to that victim status and were survivors, and you could see that in them. That was the reward. It made you feel really warm inside. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be given a job in a paid position, but had work also in a voluntary capacity. And it's the people who work in voluntary capacities around New Zealand that actually keeps New Zealand going, keeps their well-being there. It's not the government, it's these voluntary organisations that have been going for decades upon decades upon decades in New Zealand. So, as I said, I saw the hearts and souls of people. I didn't see their colours, their ethnicities, whether they were rich or poor. And I remember being told, could I possibly go out and see this lady who had numerous cats, and you couldn't get through the door because of dirty old newspapers that were centuries old. And I didn't hesitate to go and see this woman. It wasn't about pushing past the newspapers and all the cats and anything else. It was about a person who needed help. You know, it wasn't until at the end of the day that you were told to fill in a form about stats. These little boxes that says ethnicity, marry, non-marry, age, discrimination, really it was a discrimination on the form as to who was who and as to who got the most funding from the government. If you put Mary down, you certainly would get more funding. So I never ever believed the data of these stats or the census information that comes through, because we all know it's doctored, it's got political biased. It has political means, so it can be used at a later period to prove something or other, that one is more disadvantaged than the other. So, yes. So, amongst all those grieving people, there is this political stance on things, which is really horrible. So, but for me, you know, people will always be people. And the government will always make the people a political stat. So those people that are grieved turn out to be political stats. Horrible. But, you know, I don't regret one little bit about all those people now who are able to be empowered by the knowledge, the support systems, the referring to different agencies, and how people came on board to help people. Those people didn't see those organisations, those people were there on board, didn't see these people as stats. They saw them as hearts and souls, people who were struggling, you know. There are a lot of good people out there. It's just that these governments don't see them as people. They see them as data and stats. Thank you very much, people. Bye.